Hello and welcome to another episode of the Rebecca Saunders Show. I am joined today by one of my very good friends, the fantastic Debbie O'Connor. Debbie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Beck. I'm so happy to be here with you today.
I'm so pumped for this conversation, and I know it's going to deep dive into some really extraordinary places for us both in this conversation, but also for our listeners and viewers. But Deb, before I deep dive into our topic of conversation today, can you let our listeners and viewers know what it is that you actually do? What's your background?
Right. So you might have heard from the accent that I am South African. I was brought up in a small bush town on the border of the Kruger National Park called White River, which is why I've named my business White River Design. And I'm a brand strategist by profession, graphic designer by trade. So basically, I transform businesses from being ordinary to extraordinary. And I do that by using brand personalities. So that's the one part that I do. The other one is that I have a co-working space as well. So I do manage the two businesses at the same time. So I have a few things on my plate.
A few things, and that's not including all the community stuff that you do in terms of all the extra things that I would add to your curriculum, right? In the world of Debbie.
Yeah, and look, that's the kind of stuff I do because I think, I have a privileged environment where I can actually do that. And I think that we all have a certain responsibility. If we've got to a stage where we can actually do some good in the world, we should. And so I use my creativity skills to then build up a community where we are able to create blankets that we give to the homeless, domestic violence survivors, and our youth in crisis.
Amazing. I will never forget you showing me how you use plastic bags to make sleeping mats for the homeless. I thought that was just ingenious where your creativity goes. And you definitely do have a lot on your plate with all of those businesses. And you've been now in business for 20 years, celebrating 20 years this year.
20 years this year. I know. I think you get more for murder, don't you? Or less for murder. Something
Less
along
for
those lines.
murder.
Yeah, less
Yeah.
for murder.
Now, Dev, being a business owner has all of its ups and downs. And, we could talk about the trails of entrepreneurship and business ownership and all those roller coaster journeys, because I'm sure you've had many over the last 20 years. But what I wanted to talk to you about on the show today is something that I know from being your friend for a number of years, but specifically over the last few, navigating burnout. Um, I know you've had your own personal journey with this. It's hit extremely hard and you've navigated it very openly when you wanted to be able to share it. But that it's also almost a taboo subject with people that go, oh yeah, it's just the little thing. You can have a nap and you'll be fine. What has your journey with burnout been, and how did you really realize that it got to crunch time?
Yeah, look, and I think this is an important topic, and I'm very happy to speak about it because I believe that there's so many people who don't. They hide behind this facade of being busy, working ridiculous hours. They wear it as a badge of honor. And unfortunately, it's not. Like, that's what I just have to say. It's nothing to be proud of. It really is something that can be very detrimental to your health, to your relationships, to your business, to so many different aspects of your life. So there's some important things to understand when it comes to burnout. You can't get burnout from everyday life. You can only get burnout from work. Okay, so that's a very clear distinction. So if you're going through a divorce or something like that, what you're going through is completely different to burnout. So that's important to understand. The other thing to understand is that burnout normally happens or starts years and years and years before you even realize that you've hit rock bottom. And so it's very hard to identify those key trigger warning signs that you could be looking out for once you've been through it. And so I always like to give the analogy of, if you were to put a frog in a pot of water and slowly turn up the heat, the frog will stay in that water until that water is boiling. However, if you were to take a frog and throw it into a bowl of boiling water, it would jump out immediately. All right. Burnout, you're that frog in the water where the water is just getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and you don't realize it because you're becoming more and more used to it. So my story actually started 4 years before I hit rock bottom with burnout. And what I was doing is I was managing, I had the White River Design, the branding studio. I had a team of 6 that I was trying to manage. At the same time, I was starting the Creative Fringe. We were renovating this warehouse, this mechanic, dirty, disgusting warehouse into this amazing space. And I was juggling all the balls. I was doing everything. I was working ridiculous hours, 7 days a week for 9 months solid. So I did not have a single break. And so that is where the high stress, so it's a high stress environment where you're carrying the stress long term. So you can't get burnout from having a stressful week or a stressful day, possibly not even a stressful month. It is continuous high stress environment for a length of time. And this is where, you have to try and break that cycle. So if you find you're being stressed on a regular basis, breaking that cycle. But to be honest, the bottom line for me, like when everything landed up falling flat on its face, I was in a situation where I had a team member and my best friend go behind my back and start up a studio, taking a couple of my clients with them, doing a bunch of things that was really quite heartbreaking for me. And it made me go, why the hell am I doing this? I'm working so hard and this is what lands up happening. Instead of being able to see all the positive things, all the good things that have come out of it as well, my mind immediately started going towards the negative. So that's another sign that you're having burnout, where if you're traditionally a positive person, you start to find that this negativity starts coming in, and you can't seem to see the good things where it's so easy to find the bad. So I think that's the other thing. Also, you have brain fog, meaning it's so hard to make a decision. And it got to a stage where, honestly, by the time I got home and the family was like, "What's for dinner?" That to me could be like the worst question I could be asked, And so I had to put things in place like getting HelloFresh, where I just said to them, pick whatever you want, and that's what we'll have for dinner. So, but you know what? When it was happening, I couldn't actually see it. I was in it and I was deep in it, but it was my team around me who saw it and my family who saw it. And it was really interesting. When I did hit rock bottom, you actually interviewed the fabulous Jo Muirhead.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. And she was my saving grace. Honestly, I went straight to Jo and we did a program together, and she got me focusing on a whole lot of things that really I had to put in place. And the reality was, it took me 4 years to get to where I was. And she said, "Deb, it's going to take you 2 years to get out."
Wow.
But the truth is, it's 2 years after you've implemented significant change.
So
And
what were those changes that you had to do? I will deep dive into what the things your team noticed, but what are the changes that you had to put in place, and how long did they take before that 2 years started? Because you're still in that 2-year period, right?
Yeah, I'm actually just getting out of it, and I'm feeling like a million times better. I can't even tell you. So the first one and the biggest one, stop alcohol.
Yep.
So I gave up alcohol 27th of September 2019, and it really made a significant difference. The other one was being very strict around sleep. And this is something that I think, we kind of all, well, I used to do this where I go, and I only had 4 hours sleep last night. As though like I'm a hero. I'm not a hero.
Another badge of honor, right? Yeah, another badge of honor.
Yeah, another badge of honor, which really it's not. So it was really about being very, very strict about getting a minimum of 8 hours sleep. Now, during my recovery, for probably the first year, I would actually sleep for about 10 to 12 hours. And that just showed my body was so exhausted and really needed a lot of recovery. So I had to give myself time for that. And to be fair, COVID actually came at a very good time for me, because everything slowed down for everybody in the whole world. And so it was great permission for me to slow down as well. So I know that not everybody has that opportunity. The reality is that I was diagnosed just before COVID, so in 2019, and I actually thought I'd have to sell my entire business. I'd spoken to my accountant. We'd come up with a whole pricing structure. I'd put my entire sales document together. NDAs had gone out to 3 or 4 different people. Like, that's how far down the line I had got, thinking that
I remember that conversation.
yeah, very stressful and quite traumatic for me as well, because I didn't think I was ready to sell it, but I felt like that was the only solution at the time. And thank goodness Jo was there, because she was able to identify where the key stresses in the business were. So one of the major things that I did change was that, so she got me to do this exercise where for 7 days, I had to write down from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed, every single hour, what I was doing. And then I had to give it a grade between 1 to 10. And it was graded what were my energy level and what my interest level was. And at the end of that, I handed it over to Jo, and she said, Deb, it is so interesting, because every time you're doing any work with websites, your interest and your energy plummets. Every time you're doing anything with branding and you're dealing directly with people, your interest and your energy goes way up.
Yeah.
And so that was a really interesting exercise to do, because it meant that I didn't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I actually had an opportunity. She said, look, can you split the business? And so I did. So that takes a while. You know, I had to split the business. I then created a different sales offering. I actually had a web developer, and I just went straight to that web developer and said, look, I've got about 120 websites. They all need hosting, maintenance, everything else. So it was a great little business for someone to take over. And he said, I'll do it. So that landed up actually being quite a quick process compared to, other scenarios.
Yeah.
But it was significant. It was a big one, and it had to happen. Other little things was I have an iPhone, and on your iPhone you can actually put when your phone goes to sleep and when it wakes up. And so my phone turned off at 8 o'clock every night. And
Turned off or just on Do Not Disturb?
So it goes onto this Do Not Disturb, but if I want to access it, I have to give myself permission. I have to fill in a code, and then it only gives me 15 minutes at a time. So if I'm doing it 15 and then another 15 minutes, it makes me aware of how much extra time I'm actually trying to grapple back. So it's also that awareness of going, okay, well, how long am I actually sitting on these devices? So the phone turned off or switched off or shut down at 8 o'clock at night, and only turned on again at 8 o'clock the next morning. No devices in the bedroom. So no phones, nothing. So I couldn't land up getting in bed and start scrolling, right? None of that.
Yeah.
However, I did start reading. So started reading 10 pages a night, every single night. And that I found really started calming me as well and allowing me that opportunity to sleep. I did take sleeping pills. So I had medication to get me sleeping at night. But as, and I said to Jo, is that an issue? And she said, if it's getting you to sleep to help your body recover, it's okay. But what I did then was I was weaning myself off it as well. So, got really low doses in the end. But she said, you need to do, and the stuff I was taking was all herbal anyway. So it wasn't too bad. But she said, look, if this is what you need to do, Deb, it's what you need to do. Right. And so there were a whole bunch of things. Also walking, I would go for walks. And walking was good because it gave me an opportunity for thinking time, quiet time to be on my own, to think. And I know you and I have done a number of bushwalks together where we kind of have our own, little powwow sessions. But this was like I had to have a powwow session in my own head, really giving myself time to think and figure out what it is that I truly wanted and what was going to make me happy. So there were a number of things, and some of them were harder to do than others, and some were quite easy to do. But what I had to do was I had to start them all. And I had to do them all to allow myself to start resting and recuperating.
Yeah. And how I mean, I am the queen of all these sort of things on my phone that turns on and off, and I'm going to deep dive off after this conversation into how I make it even more automated than it already is. But how did you navigate that with your family? Right? It's all very well us as individuals going, this is the boundaries I'm going to put on because mentally I need this, energetically I need this. But you have two teenagers at home. You've got a beautiful husband. Was he also not taking devices into the bedroom and picked up the reading as well? Or was everyone along for the ride?
Yeah, look, and you know what? How do you get kids off their phone, right? It doesn't happen. So, but for me, it was very much a big thing. And I said to him, look, I really can't have devices in the room. And he went, that's absolutely fine. So David was incredibly supportive throughout everything. When I knew exactly what I was dealing with, I actually sat the family down. And Joe had given me a lot of literature that I could direct them to if they wanted to read it. But I was explaining to them what I was going through, why I was stressed about certain things, why I was making such significant changes. And it was interesting because one of the things, and we use this technique with my team as well, that if they saw me getting to a state where I was getting quite stressed and some of the reactions I was having, I didn't realize I was being like that. So one of the examples was being negative, when normally I wouldn't be negative about something, So to give you an example, it would be, someone would say, oh, we need to phone the printer. And I go, why bother? They don't do a good job anyway. Right? And it's so random. It's like, yeah. Why would you even say something like that? So, but this would be the headspace. I go, well, they probably won't even answer their phone. Well, you haven't even tried, right? So it was just unrealistic negativity that was coming in. So one of the things was if they identified anything where it just didn't seem me and they could see that that was a stressor, what they would do is just go and make me a cup of tea. And they'd put the tea next to me because for me, I enjoy a cup of tea. But that was their sign saying, I can see you're stressed. And they're giving me a cup of tea, which then is my sign to go, okay, Deb, you're showing signs of stressness. So you need to stop and you just need to take a moment to have your cup of tea, right? So it was such a simple thing because there's nothing worse when you are stressed for someone to go, are you okay? Are you
that's
okay?
The worst one. Yeah.
It drives you mad, right? And so instead of them saying that, because clearly you're not okay, and they can see you're not okay, but they don't know the words to kind of try and help you out of it. Because when you're in burnout, it's very hard to ask for help, because you don't want to show that you're struggling. So it becomes this downward spiral.
And
so
there probably wouldn't be any words either, right? That would even help in that scenario when you get to that point. It doesn't matter what you're going to say to me because I'm already there, like in the headspace. So having something tangible like the cup of tea it's just a different way of communicating.
Yeah,
really,
exactly.
Isn't it? It's a visual thing.
And it's also a little act of kindness as well. Someone's giving you a cup of tea, you then get the tea, you're like, oh, recognition. Okay. So it's their way of being able to say, are you okay, without having to say the words, or not even saying, are you okay, saying, I can see that you're struggling right now. Here's your cup of tea. And, everyone's different. Somebody might want a little chocolate or something. I don't know. But everyone could have a different, just that different symbol to show that they see you, they acknowledge it, and they're giving you this little, they're giving you permission to just stop and take a moment and then regroup, which is really important.
Very important. And what, I mean, I love that. And you've obviously got to a point where you've had the conversation with your team and your family and gone, this is how we can manage it. But what were the things they were seeing prior to that made them sort of raise those flags or be concerned? Because obviously, if you're going through a burnout situation, you said yourself, you don't see it. You get to 3, 4 years, 5 years down the line and go, crumpled heap. What can the people around us be looking out for in this space?
So the interesting thing is that they were identifying that I was struggling, but they didn't know what it meant. So they didn't know how bad it had actually got. So what I did when I was diagnosed with burnout and adrenal fatigue, I actually got Joe to come in and we did a team training session on this alone. And it was interesting because they identified, one of the girls identified that her husband was going into burnout. So just by having this conversation and being aware, but it was interesting because when we were then talking about it, they were saying, oh, I noticed, Deb, that you were being more negative than you normally were. You're normally so upbeat and positive about things. So that was one thing that they noticed. The other thing they noticed is that my level of communication got worse. So I stopped communicating as well as I used to. And part of that, where it turned out, was because I had brain fog. It was really hard for me to figure out what I needed to do at any given time. And so it was hard for me to then communicate where I needed help as well. So my communication lowered. I started getting snappy about silly things that I never would have ever got snappy about. Following up on things like emails or phone calls, sometimes my team would have to say to me, did you phone so-and-so? Remember I left a note on your desk and I'd completely forgotten. Or so they could notice that I wasn't doing those things. Now, when you're in burnout, that's the thing you're trying to hide. You're trying to hide that you are not being efficient. You're trying to hide that you're not being proactive about things, that your professional efficacy is actually lowering. And so this is part of the burnout, is you work harder to try and overcome like all these things that people seeing, but they still see it. They just don't know that that's what they are actually identifying. So it's things that are slipping through the cracks that normally never would have slipped through the cracks. It's things like that they found was a major difference.
And my head then goes to, in doing that and dropping the occasional ball as business owners, or as a business owner who's very front facing to all of your beautiful clients, did you have to have conversations with any of them? Or was it a case of it could be managed between your team, your support network, your family? Did at any point you have to have a conversation with your team, with your clients if things got dropped?
Look, we do have a very, very close-knit team, and we've got some very good systems in place. So it was quite easy to pick up when the ball had been dropped and do that very quickly. So at least we had that in place, which was great. When I decided to sell the business, that is when I decided to be quite open about what was happening. When I say sell the business, sell the website side of the business.
Yeah.
Because what had happened, and this is the other thing, that, once I had acknowledged that I was in burnout, it was interesting how burnout then started to manifest itself in very physical things. So Joe had warned me and said, Deb, look, there are going to be things that pop up. And she said, you might have days where you just have splitting headaches and you don't understand why. And she said that could be burnout manifesting itself in the form of a headache, or maybe there are days where you just can't wake up very easily. That would be part of it. Or so it actually got to a stage where, and I didn't realize this, I was going to have a session with Joe, and on the Monday, one of my staff had said, Deb, this website has come through, we need to do blah, blah. And I said, oh, just hang on a sec. And I had to run to the toilet. I vomited, went back, sorted out what I was doing. And I thought, oh, maybe I've eaten something. Well, this carried on for a number of days. And then I was going to have a session with Joe. And I said, look, I don't think I can come in because I don't think I'm very well. Maybe I've eaten something. And she said, Deb, how long have you been vomiting for? And I said, oh, about 3 or 4 days. She goes, it's not what you're eating. Just next time it happens, tell me what you're working on. And it was websites. And so what had happened was I'd acknowledged that websites were my issue. And now when I was dealing with the website, I actually had to go and vomit first before I dealt with it. And so it was manifesting itself that significantly for me. And I know other people with burnout, that's the type of thing. Some people pass out at work. There are all sorts of different scenarios that can manifest itself. So you never want it to get that bad. That's all I can
Oh
say is
gosh, no.
you want to get it before any of this sort of starts to happen, right? And so
Yeah.
if you can identify, or the people around you can identify, and have some education around this, so that you can then start to see any of those trigger signs. Super important.
Mm. And for those business owners that are going, I can feel this, I can relate on a few levels, not all of it, but I don't want to relate to all of it. Um, where where can they go? Where would you recommend that they start in this conversation? Because I know there's going to be a lot of people that are potentially triggered by the conversation that we've just had and the stuff that you've shared. And as much as I know our lovely friend Jo will be able to help all of them, we can't bombard her completely. We'll put her details in the show notes. But where else can people go and start those conversations? Where would you recommend that through the work that you've done and the other people that you've met during this recovery process?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, because at the time that I was being diagnosed, the World Health Organization had just accepted that burnout was actually a clinically diagnosable, I don't know, system or whatever. I don't know what you call it. But it was now a medical issue. Whereas prior to that, it was like, no, that's not even a proper thing. So, for example, with adrenal fatigue, even my doctor to this day is like, it's not really real. It's not a real thing. It's not a medically diagnosable thing, right? But burnout now is. So the first protocol I go is, you need to go to a doctor. And if the doctor turns around and tells you that it's not a thing, go and find another doctor, because it is now recognizable. Jo actually she got me to do an online sort of a whole bunch of questions, not a quiz, but it was a diagnosis type of thing. And I had to answer a bunch of questions, and then it spat out a report, and I got high marks for everything. But you don't want to get high marks for this one. This is one area you do not want to overachieve in. And
Yeah.
so that actually just showed how far down the line you are with burnout. So I'm sure there would be a lot of things around that, because it actually was my husband who had read an article on LinkedIn about burnout, and it had like 5 signs to know you've got burnout, and a number of those are the ones I've already covered. And he sent the article to me. And he said, Deb, I think this is where the problem lies. So if it hadn't been for him finding that article, I probably wouldn't have been aware that any of my symptoms were even related to burnout. I had been going to the doctor. Keep in mind, I've been going to the doctor years before, going, I'm exhausted, I'm run down, I'm not sleeping properly, I feel like I have brain fog. And because I had my thyroid removed a number of years ago, they were going, we'll test your thyroid, we'll give you a vitamin B12 injection. And so they had all these other answers, but that wasn't the solution. Like that didn't help me. It was a band-aid, and it didn't actually fix the problem.
So we're going to link all of these resources and probably that article if we can find it. I'm sure it's somewhere in the links to the show notes, because it is an extremely important topic that I know a lot of us don't talk enough about. So if you have been triggered by this, please do check out the show notes below, but we'll be putting in as many resources as possible. Debbie, before I let you go, where can people come and find you and interact more with you and your beautiful organizations?
Right. So I have my own personal Instagram. I tend to do more stuff on Instagram than Facebook. So Debbie O Brands. That's my Instagram handle. I've got White River Design, which is on Facebook. It's on Instagram as well. And then we've got the Creative Fringe. And that's where, if you do want to check out some of the philanthropic stuff that we're doing, this is our co-working space. We are co-workers with a conscience. And we have this amazing Think Outside the Square challenge that we do every year, where we get people to knit or crochet 20 by 20 centimeter squares. And we sew them together into the most fabulous, beautiful beautiful blankets that give warmth and a nice hug for these people who so desperately need it during winter.
Definitely go check that one out and help where you can. I know Debbie does accept square knitters as also people that can knit these beautiful squares together into these gorgeous blankets. We'll link all of that in the show notes. Debbie, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. I have very much appreciated your time on today's episode.
Thanks for having me.